Sheltering from the monsoon rains in an ancient teak building on the outskirts of Ubud, Bali, a council is gathered for a still nameless idea. The idea of a performance as a warning about the changes to the world and its weather. A performance transported and shared from a ship, designed to voyage through the Indonesian archipelago. If you remember from the last episode, this project was initiated by my partner, the musician and activist Nova Ruth, and myself, Grey Filastine. Joining us are 6 others, a mix of friends and strangers hastily drafted for their skills. We sit together on the weathered floor planks, taking all day and into the night. The topics range from the loftiest ambitions down to the devilish details. Crucially, how to build this ship, how to crew it, how to fund it, and what will it be called? The biggest question, why, is obvious to everyone gathered here, but we circle back often anyways, to avoid getting so bogged down in the process that we forget purpose. The mission is dead simple. We want to use our skills to unfuck the world, and we want to do so in the most beautiful possible way. Before cramming too many hopes into a vessel that doesn't yet exist, we must first build a ship big enough to hold these dreams. Fortunately, we know just the place. Whoa, hold on. This ain't Hollywood. Here in the real world, the path from imagination to reality is only 1% magical thinking. The balance is made of sweat and study, hustle and perseverance. To skip the slog would be an injustice to the truth. The title of this episode comes from the innocuous drinking phrase, bottoms up. Back in ye olden days when the British Navy ruled the seas, there was a chronic shortage of cannon fodder, so Navy recruiters would hang out in pubs and discreetly drop a coin into men's drinks. If the drinker didn't notice, the accepted coin was considered their enlistment fee. It sounds kind of cutesy now, but the combined dangers of the sea and war made this an almost certain death sentence. So pub owners in the ports of Old England, eager to keep their customers alive, began serving grog in glass-bottomed cups. And as a reminder to check what might be hidden inside, they said, bottoms up. The rest of this episode is a bottoms up in that original meaning, to have a careful look before downing the glass, so we don't commit the terrible mistake of going to sea unprepared and unlikely to come back alive. That first council gave us the name Arka Kinari, and it fleshed out a vision, but generated far more questions than it answered. Enough legal, technical, nautical, and artistic questions to fill the seconds of this podcast 10,000 times over. Which meant that first, I had to transform from a full-time musician into a full-time researcher, which was effectively career suicide. Because songs make fans, spreadsheets do not. In less than a year, the festival invitations tapered off, the record labels forgot my name, managers and booking agents evaporated. Nova and I were never more than a ghostly blip on the radar of the music industry. And when we began to focus on Arka Kinari, that blip faded out entirely.
Sonar is working, Captain. 1 minute he was steady, then he was gone. And for a second, I thought I heard...
Heard what?
I thought I heard singing, sir.
The first priority was to find out who came before us, who already brought arts onto the sea, and how. Let's start with showboats. Colloquially, a showboat is someone who overdresses or grandstands. But I want to talk about the literal showboats, which were floating vaudeville theaters that plied the waterways of 19th century America. These showboats were pimped out with architectural filigrees and fancy paint jobs to grab attention whenever they arrived at riverside towns. My takeaway is that even at rest, our vessel should be dressed to impress. Meanwhile, around the same time period, but on the opposite side of the world, Chinese opera companies called Red Boat Troupes were touring Asia's rivers on evocative red junk ships that were their home and tour vehicle. Unlike their American counterparts, the crews of China's Red Boat Troupes were mystics and revolutionaries. They spread the Wing Chun form of Kung Fu and helped foment a rebellion against China's last imperial dynasty. Further proof that art once had teeth, and that we artists need to stop filing down our fangs and learn how to be dangerous again. Ships and the arts intersected famously in the 1960s, when musical outlaws installed pirate radio stations onto ships, breaking state media monopolies by transmitting off the coasts of Europe and the UK. These pirate radio ships shared new music that trampled the rigid color lines of that era, breaking new genres like ska, reggae, and punk. By operating from international waters, they were beyond the reach of the law.
So governments used violence to shut them down.
Listen to Pirate Radio North Sea International, transmitting while in flames after being bombed by Dutch commandos.
SOS, this is Radio North Sea International. We are on fire due to a bomb thrown on board. Mayday, mayday, mayday. We may have to abandon ship. We are on fire in the engine room. The fire has now reached the bridge.
Not every lesson came from history.
Some projects are still afloat.
One of my first European gigs as an electronic musician was on a hulking former East German fishing ship called the Stubnitz. The Stubnitz makes long residencies in different Baltic ports, hosting parties in its 3 cavernous fish holds. There's an outlaw spirit to the Stubnitz. It's like a floating colony of Berlin's anarchic late 20th century underground scene. Berlin may now be a hipster playground, but just like persecuted Quakers fled their homelands to survive in pockets abroad, the Stubnitz preserves the industrial punk zeitgeist of pre-gentrified Berlin by keeping it offshore, safe from the property developers and the police batons. From the Stubnitz, I learned that there is such a thing as too big, because any ship the length of a football pitch requires a costly professional crew. Very late in this research process, I came across the closest example to our own plan, hiding in plain sight just across the border from my old American home base in Seattle. The Caravan Stage Theater Company toured British Columbia by horse-drawn wagons until the early 1990s, when they decided to build an even more anachronistic tour vehicle, a wooden riverboat. They've been touring theater productions by water ever since. We booked a gig in Vancouver, BC, just to interview the son of the founders. He was surprisingly normal for having been raised aboard the ship and within the shows. And his advice was simply to launch our project, and that if we're persistent enough,
We'll find a way to make it work.
the biggest inspiration didn't come from the floating arts venues, but another direction entirely: collectives of eco-utopian sea people. And there's no better example than the folks behind the Biosphere Foundation.
Biosphere 2.
Biosphere 2.
Biosfera 2.
Biosphere 2.
What an exciting assignment.
They are best known for causing a media frenzy in the 1980s with their campus of sealed ecological biomes in the Arizona desert.
A biosphere is a virtually closed system with plants and animals and atmospheres all inside.
This same group of ambitious dreamers also built the Heraclitus, a 100-ton ship crafted with chicken wire and cement on a squatted piece of waterfront in Oakland, California.
We built it, and in theory it would float, but we didn't know what was going to happen.
After surprising all the onlookers when the ship actually floated at her launching, the Heraclitus went on to sail the world, from the Amazon to Antarctica. I sent an email to the dusty website of the Heraclitus, asking if they'd suffer my questions, assuming they might reply months later from Madagascar or Iceland. But their response arrived the following day.
Hello, Grey. This is Christine. Thanks for contacting us. The Heraclitus is currently dry docked in Roses, a small town in northeast Spain.
By freakish luck, the Heraclitus was only 1 hour from my home in Barcelona. A few days later, there I was, standing on their ship in a dry dock, asking my usual 1,000 questions, which took all night and into the following morning. The crew of the Heraclitus were so generous with their knowledge, and that was the case with everyone I interviewed behind all the artistic and utopian projects on the sea. They were all keen on helping another project to be born. It was so refreshing to transition into a network with such a completely different set of values to the competitive spirit of the music business, the sailors' timeless code of solidarity and mutual aid. Although, as my circle of research expanded, I learned that not every sailor had kind things to say. Yachties, with their fiberglass pleasure boats, were nearly always dismissive, so I chose to ignore them. Surprisingly, the biggest discouragement came from an unlikely quarter. Moxie Marlinspike was one of a small community of North American anarchists that migrated from rails to sails. That is, from a nomadic existence of freight-hopping trains to turning abandoned sailboats into their homes and vehicles. They basically transposed their punk DIY ethos from land to sea. Moxie filmed his adventures and published a self-narrated documentary called Hold Fast, in which he and a few other crusty, bedreadlocked misfits explore the Caribbean.
The Anarchist Yacht Club is the club for everyone who dreams about sailing off into the salt seas.
He later went on to develop an encryption software now used by companies like Google and Facebook. So, an anarchist that loves wild projects on the sea, with money to burn, he seems like the missing link to make Arka Kinari float, either as a captain, a funder, or just a consultant. I thought he could certainly put some wind in our sails. A fellow crypto-anarchist introduced us, and I laid out our plans for Arka Kinari. Hello, Moxie. This is Grey. Moxie's response was pure discouragement.
Sorry, but this doesn't sound very realistic. You guys will be seasick all the time, and your equipment is going to rust and break. Also, I estimate this project to cost around $3 million.
A response like this, from the person I'd expected to be our most natural ally, was simply devastating. I became paralyzed by doubt, and pretty much gave up on this dream. Until I heard back from another stranger. Margaret came from that same small community of sailpunks. She owned a beautiful steel ship named Drummer, which she kept afloat by working in the Alaska wilderness each summer counting animal scat. She was the yin to Moxie's yang, someone who knew full well how hard this would be, but that it was worth doing anyway.
Hey, yeah, I'm happy to help, because I care about this project more than I probably should.
The critical lesson for Margaret and all the other utopian seafarers was simply to prove that we were not totally crazy, because other people, mortals like us, had done something similar. Although they were few and probably each doubted their own sanity, it worked out, or at least it worked out for this pre-filtered sample. I tried not to dwell on the fact that whoever didn't succeed also wouldn't have survived to tell the tale. Their input also helped define the size of the ship we should have, between 20 and 24 meters, because anything smaller wouldn't fit the equipment and crew, while anything bigger would be too hard to maneuver and maintain. They also taught me that a ship must have charisma, because a boat is not just a tool, it is also a talisman. But should the ship be made of wood, steel, or fiberglass? How many masts and sails? What shapes for those sails? What kind of keel and how deep? Should the rigging be of stainless or galvanized steel? The DC electrics 12 or 24 volt, the AC electrics 110 or 220 volt. How many cabins? How many toilets? Water tanks? Waste tanks? What kind of anchor and the length and strength of the anchor's chain? Which of the thousands of varieties of chart plotter, radio, sat phone, and radar? From the bottom of the keel up to the top of the mast, each rope, block, light, hatch, and gadget must be selected. One wrong choice could sink the ship along with us inside of it. What I'm trying to say here is that starting a project on the sea isn't some Peter Pan bullshit, but a major feat of engineering. And that, friends, is why the total populations of humans inhabiting the watery 3/4 of this world's surface is less than that of one small town. Because launching yourself onto the sea is a difficulty second only to launching yourself into space. And at sea, there's no Houston.
Houston, we've had a problem here. This is Houston. Say again, please. Yes, sir. Houston, we've had a problem.
But the ship is still only the container. There's also the technical needs of the cargo to consider. Our cargo is a live performance. It means we need to mount a theater, the stage, power, sound, lights, and projectors atop the boat, which is like designing a theater to function during a continuous earthquake and the occasional tsunami. But unlike all these boaty questions, I'm weirdly qualified for producing the gig. I've toured for 20 years on a shoestring, played in squats, in coal basements, in abandoned train tunnels. I've DJ'd from moving shopping carts and from a janky raft on the Mississippi. What's more, after 3 decades of DIY touring, I know thousands of travelers, hackers, ferals, and outsider artists. The wildest fringes of the performing arts are my kin. So when I fired a signal flare across the internet to ask for help, they answered the call. Sound system advice flowed in from Colombia to Tasmania, thick with jargon like Class D amps and folded horns. But as anyone involved in DJ culture knows, a sound system is always a work in progress. Video projection should have been easy, because a sailing ship comes with screens included, those big pieces of white canvas used to harness the wind. Finally, there's power. Any ship needs electricity, but we need to have many times that normal capacity to power the gig. A comprehensive renewable energy system had to be designed. Solar panels, charge controllers, batteries, inverters to support both the ship systems and the show. There was another problem to solve. The law. Because any ambition to sail around the edges of the law must first know the shape and hardness of that adversary. What are the unavoidable taxes, licenses, fees, and insurances? Are you under the legal jurisdiction of the nation of your registration or the nation where you're floating? How do you deal with immigration and customs in the borderless sea? How does the right of innocent passage work through territorial waters? And, most important for a scofflaw like me, which of these rules can be ignored?
Nearly every one of these investigations led first to dead ends and detours before reaching any epiphanies.
For the sake of example, I'll tell you about one of the most vexing legal questions, which might at first seem a strange choice to share, but trust me, it's fascinating. Each ship has a nationality. We call it the ship's flag. You'd think that choosing a flag would be easy, like where a boat is built or where its owners live, and that's exactly how it worked until the 1920s, when American passenger liners decided to get clever. They wanted to sell alcohol during Prohibition and discovered it wasn't technically illegal to register their ships in another country. So they flagged their fleets in Panama, where alcohol was still legal, so that the laws of Panama applied once at sea, thereby accidentally innovating a practice which would change the world forever, a practice which we now call the flag of convenience. Imagine if you could choose any passport for your newborn child. Maybe you'd choose someplace like Canada for its wealth and its safety. But for exactly those same reasons, Canada makes an awful nationality for a ship. Instead, you hunt for the nation with the most relaxed labor and maritime laws. Then you set up a shell company in that nation, a company with only one asset, your ship, and no other activity. This often means nothing more than paying for a yearly business license and a private mailbox. There are dodgy lawyers that will do all the research and legwork for cheap, although not cheap enough for me. Most big shipping companies will hide this first shell company inside of another shell company in yet another country, someplace with very little rule of law, which is in turn owned by yet another shell company in some other corrupt country, so that ownership and any potential liability is nested like Russian dolls. This is why the sea is such a wild west. Not only is it a space beyond the laws of man, but the floating bits of human civilization that traverse it are as anonymous as an internet troll and usually just as unethical. So, if you can choose any flag, why not the flag of Angola, an elegant field of red and black overlaid with a golden AK-47? Well, because of something called the Paris Memorandum of Understanding, which divides the world's ship registries into 3 groups based on their fleet's history of troubles. There's a white list, a gray list, and a black list. Coast guards will stop and frisk those driving while black. This sounds overtly racist, but in fact, it's more complicated, because 40% of the world's shipping fleet is registered to Liberia, Panama, and the Marshall Islands, nations on the white list, but not populated by white people. The only color that matters to multinational corporations is the color of your money. This means that a Chinese oil tanker could be flagged to West African Liberia, while a Norwegian cruise ship is flagged in Central America's Panama. Now you can finally understand those strange maritime stories that sometimes hit the news, like in 2019 when an oil tanker spilled crude oil off the coast of Israel, ruining their beaches. It turned out to be a Panamanian-flagged ship owned by a holding company in the Marshall Islands, but the true owner was from Iran. Israel claimed this was a case of environmental terrorism by Iran, but the accusation was unprovable and unpunishable, precisely because of the insulating power of flags of convenience. You might wonder why this murky business would even matter to some doe-eyed hippies like us. It matters because registering in the wrong country would strangle Arka Kinari in the crib. Our home waters will be Indonesia. But a boat with an Indonesian flag can only be operated by licensed Indonesian seamen. It would be illegal for any foreigner, including myself, to work on board, even to touch the steering wheel as a volunteer. It means we'd have to share a boat with at least 6 strangers and pay their monthly salaries.
Janganlah, gila apa?
Jangan.
I'm a citizen of Spain and could register there. But my 10-year battle to earn that citizenship taught me the deep dysfunctions of the Spanish state.
No seas tonto. Ni se te ocurra.
I didn't even bother checking the place I was born, the United States. It's an open secret that the CIA helped Indonesia's 1965 military coup, leaving 1 million corpses and a US client state under the dictator Suharto. Also, just imagine flying Old Glory in a Muslim-majority nation when
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
With Indonesia, Spain, and the US disqualified, I spent a year trying to choose the best flag of convenience, only to settle on the most ironic flag to display in the waters of Indonesia. That of their former colonizer, the Netherlands. The Netherlands has some of the highest boat ownership per capita in the world, which makes a lot of sense for a nation whose very name points out that they are below sea level. With boating considered something of a birthright or even a survival mechanism, no license of any kind is required to captain a private vessel shorter than 24 meters. The Netherlands are also 4th from the top in the Paris MOU whitelist, so we won't attract unwanted attention. It turns out that the fleets of activist organizations like Greenpeace and the Sea Shepherd are also flagged Dutch, which means that their top-notch marine lawyers came to the exact same conclusions. One decision made, one spreadsheet resolved, in an action plan: change my legal residency to the Netherlands or make a shell company there, and keep the boat under 24 meters. While the research into flag registration did finally resolve in an answer, most topics didn't lead to any such tidy conclusion. With so many variables to calculate, I felt like a toddler trying to play 3-dimensional chess. I could barely grasp the rules, let alone anticipate enough moves in advance. With these unknowns, it came down to a coin toss. A 50-50 chance of being right, and maybe better odds, if you believe in the fuzzy logic of self-actualization books, that the universe conspires to help those on a mission. There's something weirdly familiar about that first council in the teak house back in the hills of Bali. You know the story.
I'm looking for someone to share in an adventure.
An unlikely mix of people gather in a bucolic countryside to plan a journey because of a growing existential threat. Decades of lies from the fossil fuel industry have tried to convince us that climate change is as fantastical as Mount Doom. I wish they were right, but no. This doom is nonfiction. To paraphrase the master, you don't get to choose the time you live in, but you do choose what you do in that time. And we should be doing anything and everything, because to do otherwise is to write off much of biological life. All of the breath-giving flora and the breathtaking fauna that animate this beautiful and singular planet. Nature seemed an infinite bounty for prior generations. Our ancestors could never have dreamed that one day we'd have to budget the parts per million of carbon in the very air which envelops us. Future generations will arrive too late to make a meaningful course change. They're already guaranteed to inherit a disfigured world. The extent of the damage, the scale of extreme weather, famine, and displacement is determined in the length of a single human lifetime, and that is ours. This is the story of our attempt to pull the emergency brake on this apocalypse. It's a solution as old as the written word. If the seas will rise, then build an ark.
Mayday, mayday, mayday. Hell and High Water is not backed by any radio station or podcast conglomerate, which means we need your help to reach more ears. Please rate and comment wherever you listen to help us get recommended to others.
Even better, suggest the story to a few friends directly. Send them a link, because we all need suggestions to find signals in this sea of noise.
If you have enough loot to support the voyage and the creation of future audio episodes, please join our Patreon, where you'll also get access to writings, videos, and photos just for supporters. That's patreon.com/Arka Kinari. Patreon.com/Alpha Romeo Kilo Alpha Kilo India November Alpha Romeo India. Story, narration, audio production, and sound design by Grey Filastine, with the following contributors.
Story editing and sound design contribution by Rabia Williams. Story editing by Raka Ibrahim. Narration coaching by Jati Anito. Production assistance by Rizky Maulana. Season production by Matt Jacob.
Featuring the guest voices of Christine Hunt by voicemail, Margaret Drummer using text-to-speech from her written messages, Moxie Marlinspike using text-to-speech from his written messages.
Featuring the music of 10,000 Dolphin Angels by Brent Arnold, Hypnotico by Philistine, Drone Silences by Philistine.
The creation of Hell and High Water is supported by the Luminous Foundation, Climate Works, and people like you joining our Patreon.